Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Phantom of the Rubens, and today we're having Dr. Daniel Sobrino Ralston, who is an associate curator of the Spanish paintings in the National Gallery. He's researching the Spanish paintings from the 17th to the 19th century, and he recently contributed to such exhibitions as After Impressionism and St. Francis of Assisi, as well as he co-curated José María Velasco exhibition, A View of Mexico, and it's a National Gallery first exhibition devoted to the history of the Latin America. Hello, Daniel.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to see you.
Thank you for coming. I actually wanted to ask you about the exhibition. How did it come to sort of all together? How was the preparatory process for it?
So the exhibition was actually proposed to us by my co-curator on the exhibition, the artist Dexter Dalwood. Dexter had been the artist trustee at the gallery for a number of years in the past and has lived for maybe the past 5 years or so in Mexico City. And in the process of doing a show of his work at MUNAL, at the Museo Nacional de Arte, so our sort of counterpart institution in Mexico City, Dexter did a show where he had his works, and he was allowed to select some works from the collection. And so through that process, he really got to know the work of Velasco. And knowing the 19th century collection very well at the National Gallery, I think he was really intrigued why an artist of Velasco's importance, certainly eminence in his own country, wasn't really better known abroad. And so knowing that, Dexter very enterprisingly came to approach our director, Gabriele Finaldi, about the possibility of doing an exhibition. So we owe it to Dexter, the original idea. And then I was very happy to be able to work with Dexter from about the fall of 2022 up until the show opened in March of this year, March 2025. So a long process, as these things usually are. But in fact, for the National Gallery, it's quite a quick exhibition in a way, sort of 2.5 years. Mm-hmm. And the preparations were, always aided by the Mexican government and by our colleagues there. The process was more or less difficult, I think, than other exhibitions because these works, many of them haven't traveled very much. And so there was a long process of negotiation with both the state sort of government, INBAL, the Instituto Nacional de Bellas Artes y Literatura, and then also with MUNAL and other sort of constituent museums.
How did it work logistically? How does it feel to create an exhibition that's between sort of London, that's between Mexico, that's between as well? You had something from Prague, as I remember.
No, completely. I mean, I think the exhibition is interesting for that in a way because many of our big international exhibitions draw loans from all around the world. But in this case, we were borrowing the vast majority of the works from Mexico, where we hadn't really borrowed that much or lent very much. Indeed, in the past, we had lent a work by Velázquez to a show at, I think, the Palacio de Bellas Artes in maybe 2018. But other than that, we didn't have a long history of working with Mexican institutions. And 17 of the works came to us from MUNAL, from the main art museum in Mexico City. And so they were very generous, but that was still a long process in sort of sorting out which works were available to travel. And indeed, because of the change of government in Mexico, the end of the sexenio, the end of one presidential term, basically there's a sort of administrative gap from the time of the elections until the time the new administration is appointed, meaning that we were sort of in limbo waiting a little bit for things to be signed off. And so it was a very nerve-wracking experience, certainly for our exhibition managers and registrars. But we knew that it was all going to come through in the end. But I think that was one sort of administrative bump in the road that we maybe didn't anticipate. And
what was the main challenge? So would you say this was a main challenge, or were there other challenges for this exhibition to sort of?
Well, I mean, I think in sort of logistical terms, yes, of course, one of the great challenges is finding which of these works are available to travel. The other, of course, with a painter like Velasco, who is held in a lot of public collections in Mexico, but is also still held in great numbers in private collections. And so one of the difficult sort of enterprises of the exhibition was through our collaborators in Mexico City, getting access to these works by Velasco that were in quite private collections. we were very, very fortunate to be able to work with Maria Elena Altamirano Piol, who is the great-granddaughter of the artist and the great sort of scholar of his work. She's published really the thing that's closest to a catalog raisonné that we have. And she was involved in the project from the very beginning, collaborating with us. And she eventually contributed to the catalog. And she was able to really help guide us in sorting out which works we might need to see that were in private collections, as well as the whereabouts of those works when that wasn't necessarily clear. So I think that was also a difficulty, is trying to see things in private collections that maybe she had seen in the process of writing her book sort of 25 years ago, but hadn't seen since. And so that was one of the challenges, I think.
And it actually brings me to another question. Were there any discoveries that you made while preparing this exhibition?
Well, I mean, I think one of the great achievements for future scholarship on Velasco that this exhibition puts forward, I mean, it isn't just that it's the first show dedicated solely to Velasco outside Mexico since the 1970s. It's also that I think in the catalog we're able to draw out a lot of source material that hasn't really been scrutinized by anyone other than Maria Elena for many, many years. And this is in part because she just decided that her archive, so her long sort of series of acquisitions around his correspondence and documents and other things, which she'd been building up since really the 1980s, that collection was sold to the Museo Calus, a private museum in Mexico City. And I think because those things were now entering this sort of more public realm, they had just been sort of her purview for a long time, and they hadn't been as readily accessible as they are now. And so we were very fortunate to collaborate with the Museo Calus, who gave us access to some of the archival materials. And so I know, for example, in my essay in the catalog, which is about sort of Velasco and his international context and reach, there are a number of things that I was able to pull out of that archive that allow us to be more certain that Velasco traveled to London for a couple of days in early 1889, which had been mentioned but not really substantiated. And then this amazing new copybook, which is a book of correspondence that hadn't been previously known to Maria Elena, that I believe was acquired by the Museo Calus. And that allowed us, in my essay, to draw a bit more of a sort of strong connection between Velasco and his teacher, the Italian painter Eugenio Landesio, because we know now that Velasco actually sends letters to Landesio when he's returned to Italy and asks him whether he's seen his painting in Paris. So it shows this sort of longer connection abroad than we had previously seen. And I think in terms of great sort of discoveries of pictures, I don't think we can claim that. In many ways, the work of Velasco is well known, and certainly things that are in public collections are well known. But one of the great coups, I think, of the exhibition was to get from the Museo Arte de Orizaba, which is in the state of Veracruz, the Great Comet of 1882, which is this tremendous picture painted 2 years before Velasco's death, one of his late masterpieces. And that really hadn't traveled very much at all in the past. And so it was a real surprise to be able to get that. And it's a work that we had only seen in photographs until about, I guess, a year and a half ago when Dexter and I went with our sort of special advisor on this exhibition, Francisco Bersunza, out to go see it in Orizaba, in an amazing sort of old convent building, but in sort of viewing conditions that weren't ideal. And so that was an amazing thing, I think, to be able to bring to London and then on to Minneapolis, where we go next.
And were there any works that you wanted to include but couldn't?
Well, I mean, I think with any exhibition like this, there are some things that you see in private collections, and then for various reasons you're not able to have in the show. And that was certainly the case for our exhibition here. There are a number of works that we would have really liked to include, and some of them were still illustrated in the catalog, but in the end, sort of the collectors decided that it was not in their interest, or they didn't feel comfortable lending, which is more than all right. And those works, I think, would have added to the show, but I think they are, with their representation in the catalog, allow us, I think, to sort of still know the broad spectrum of Velasco's art. And I'm very, very happy with the 30 works that we ended up getting. So I don't have any great regrets.
And if you would have to do this show again, what would you change?
I think, Well, I mean, I think in the end, you always want more
Such
time,
question,
right?
yes.
You always really want more
Of course.
time. And I think that, an extra year would have really helped, especially in terms of sort of the catalog research. But I mean, this is always what curators want, is more time to do proper research. What else would we? No, I mean, other than that, I think I'm quite pleased with the way that the exhibition turned out, because the goal, right, is to offer, a sort of an introduction to this very unfamiliar artist for many people here in the UK. The name doesn't have a lot of recognition here. And I think to do a larger show would be sort of unhelpful in a way. You really want to show the artist with his very best works in a relatively sort of small environment. And so I was happy with how that turned out. So no, I mean, other than, always the hope to do a bit more archival research, which we'd all like. That's the one thing I would like more time to have done.
Great essay, by the way, in the catalog. I really enjoyed reading that. But I wanted to ask you, do you have any favorite work in the exhibition? Like, if you could take one home, which one would it be?
Well, I think, obviously my choice will be dictated by size, in part because, those huge exhibition pictures cannot really go into a London flat. But I think the work that speaks to me most, or the thing that I would want in my own home, is the very small sketch, really, of the two pyramids, the pyramids of the sun and the moon at Teotihuacan, painted in 1878. And it's just an extraordinarily fresh little picture coming from a private collection in Mexico, from the collection of Pérez Simón. Beautiful work. And it really encapsulates so many things that Velasco is interesting for. I mean, you have these amazing representations of the pyramids at Teotihuacan. You have this way that the sun, the rays of the sun break through clouds on the horizon, which is a sort of a characteristic motif for him. And all of this is, maybe 15 by 30 centimeters, a nice small size work. So that's the one in the show that I think I would most readily pocket.
What were your sort of first emotions? How did you feel when you received the proposition of such an exhibition?
Well, I mean, I think it was a thrilling prospect, because Velasco is an artist who I had, encountered a little bit in graduate school at Columbia in the US, where I think sort of Mexican art is more of a known quantity than it is in the UK. And no, it struck me as an amazing project. I just wasn't sure whether or not we'd be able to pull it off. But no, it was a thrilling thing for Gabriele really to sort of put me in touch with Dexter to begin working up sort of the practical planning for the exhibition, because it's a rare opportunity for us at the gallery to show a historical Latin American artist. It's the first time it's been done, which is quite impressive considering it's our 200th anniversary. So that, I think, the moment of that struck me as something that would really make the project worthwhile.
And will there be more exhibitions like this in a national gallery?
Well, I can't say for the moment. There's nothing certainly in schedule as yet on a Latin American subject. It's something I think that we should continue to think about in the context of the gallery, because of course one of the great repositories of painting in the Western European tradition is Latin America, and so it's certainly a topic that we're giving some thought. The Velasco exhibition really fit into a whole series of shows on 19th century sort of national landscapes that my colleagues in the post-1800 team had done over the past sort of 15 years or so, led by Chris Riepel, who has done shows on Russian painting, on Poland, and it was good, I think, to be able to fit the Velasco exhibition into this kind of series of exhibitions, which also included, Australia's Impressionists, shows on Winslow Homer and Thomas Cole, and it was just a great opportunity to go outside the Anglosphere in the 19th century.
And I wanted to ask you, for some of our viewers who maybe haven't seen this exhibition, though I do believe most of them have.
I'd be shocked if they haven't.
Because it's such an amazing exhibition that had also an amazing number of visitors, and such also something really cool that the National Gallery did. I wanted to ask you to state a few main reasons why one should visit this exhibition, and also maybe for some of the viewers who don't know the artist to tell us a bit more about the artist.
Right, no, of course. So José María Velasco was born in 1840, dies in 1912, and is by far the leading landscape painter of Mexico in the 19th century. He's really well known, especially for his paintings of the Valley of Mexico, which is the area around present-day Mexico City. So he paints, or he's best known for these really sweeping vistas that take in this amazing sort of high-altitude volcanic bowl with volcanoes all around. Velasco, because he hasn't been exhibited much abroad in the past sort of 30 or 40 years, is an artist that we don't immediately know that well. But he fits into this sort of tradition of sort of large-scale landscapes in the 19th century that has something to do with sort of a natural history as well as sort of national stories. So he brings together landscape and history in a really intriguing way to tell sort of the story of Mexico in the 19th century.
And the main reason for one to visit this exhibition?
Well, I think the main reason is you should want to know an artist that is considered, the great sort of 19th century painter of his country. I think if you haven't been to Mexico, Velasco really can show you what Mexico is, what it looks like. I mean, in the 19th century and a little bit today as well. But I think those are some of the main reasons to see it, as well as to think about, why it is that we don't necessarily know Velasco that well, and think about his work in relation to works in the collection of the National Gallery, to just think more broadly about the 19th century and how we can think sort of outside, French and German and Spanish painting.
And you also seem to engage quite a lot of visitors for this exhibition, as from what I have researched. And congratulations on that, and congratulations once more on this amazing exhibition. But how was the process of also engaging with an audience? And
well, I mean, we have many of my colleagues at the gallery are focused on exactly that, whether it's marketing or education, learning, and so it's been interesting to develop programs with them and to get feedback on what kind of works, what doesn't, and then also to engage with the press. We had a really great long write-up about the exhibition in BBC Mundo, so the BBC's Spanish language arm, and a very smart review in Apollo by a scholar of 19th century literature. So it was interesting to see how the show is received by different sort of audiences. But one thing that I've really enjoyed, I think, as we all do, is getting to be in the exhibition with visitors, whether it's with groups or with sort of scheduled visits or just taking a friend around. I think there's a real enjoyment in getting to show people what things you like in the show and why you think certain things are interesting.
And what do you think is the main sort of thing that's working with an audience out of the events or out of the publicity around the show? From your experience, what have worked the most?
I mean, worked in what way? Like it engaged people the most? Engaging
people the most, attracting audience the most, telling them the story of the artist the most.
Well, I mean, it's a hard question to answer.
Sorry for asking.
No, because it seems like it's a couple of questions, because on the one hand, what helps people engage the most is it seems to me often the opportunity to be in the exhibition with me or with Dexter or with both of us and sort of hear our sort of take on it. Not to say that it has to be sort of a formal tour, but I think how people get the most engaged in a thing. But what sort of brings people in? Obviously not that. And I think a lot of it will have to do with our advertising and making sure that people recognize, at least in part, the name or the cactus, the great image of the cactus that's on the posters and the tube. I think that really helps draw visitors in as well. And then I think the other exciting part, especially now that we've reopened the Sainsbury Wing entrance and our visitor numbers are even higher than they were before, is that this show is right in the middle of the building. I think people come across it, and you can just buy a ticket at the door and walk in. And so I think that will also help as well, especially during sort of our most busy season during the summer.
What inspired you to become an art historian? Was there a moment in your life or anything?
I mean, no, a lot of wrong turns to arrive at this. I think no, I suppose. I mean, I began to study art history basically at the end of high school. I was walking down the hallway after class one day, and I saw a bunch of my friends in this one classroom, but after school, and so I wasn't sure what the deal was. And so I poked my head in, and they said, "Oh, it was the first day of AP art history." I don't think I really understood that art history was a subject until that point. And then once they showed me the textbook, which was, some beautifully introductory textbook, I was like, "Well, I'll take the class if I get the textbook." And then I really enjoyed that, and that was first taught by Jamie Sadler was my teacher. Then I was sort of interested in architecture history, and then at undergrad I sort of decided I would keep trying to see if I continued to enjoy it, and then really did, and then started the PhD. And I know, but I don't think there was any particular sort of moment that really sort of set me on the course. I mean, had I known how long and arduous the process was going to be, I don't know that I would have done it. But yes, I don't think that there's any sort of conversion moment, unfortunately. Nice that would be as a story.
Why did you decide to specialize in Spanish paintings, and did you decide to specialize in them since the beginning, or?
Yeah, I really did in a way. Like that interest in Spanish art in particular came already during sort of my undergraduate study, and certainly was part of my applications to graduate school. I think it was in part that having some sort of Spanish background, my grandparents on my mom's side are Spanish. I was familiar, had been there a fair amount, and so I was very surprised to, especially when studying the history of the 19th century, that the only thing that seemed to matter was France. And despite there having been sort of many similar contemporaneous political developments and other things in Spain, that it sort of just didn't register in art history, right? It didn't really seem to matter that much. And so I guess that was sort of one way of realizing that there was a hole or sort of a gap in the scholarship, and that was sort of what I proposed to do during my PhD, was to do some work towards sort of redressing that imbalance, that sort of interest in only French art rather than Spanish art. But that was the reason, I suppose, for doing that.
How did your academic research on Fortuny sort of influence your curatorial practice in a national gallery?
Well, look, I mean, I think everything you do as a curator is certainly at an institution like the National Gallery is conditioned by doctoral study, by those standards, by that kind of rigor, or I mean, ideally it should be. And so the work on Fortuny, Fortuny or Fortun in Catalan, is an artist who was really closely engaged, especially in the late 1860s, with sort of the idea of Spanish painting and sort of, the avatars of its great past. So Goya, Velázquez, Murillo. And so you see, especially in the kinds of interests that Fortuny has in that period, how he is trying to insert himself into this lineage of sort of the great Spanish artists. And so for me, that was sort of a great introduction. And of course, part of my work always dealt with the 17th century and sort of understanding what that sort of lineage was. And so that, I think, has informed, thinking about sort of the history of Spanish painting. And at the gallery, I think, the sort of PhD work is really foundational to the kind of work you do on a catalog, and even to the kind of sort of administrative work that one has to do. Often, when you're at an institution, you have a bit more support in doing these things. But I think one of the great benefits of the PhD is learning how to do it sort of all on your own. And of course, an extraordinarily trying and painful process, but one that I think allows you to really go forward with the knowledge and skills that make for successful exhibitions, for successful collection research. Pretty indispensable, I think.
And what were sort of the main points on your pathway to achieve such a greatness of the curatorial position in
Well,
National
greatness. That's
Gallery?
maybe overstating the case. But I started my PhD at Columbia. I was working in the 19th century, specifically on sort of Spanish 19th century painting, and then Columbia is quite a long PhD process. So there's sort of more mandatory built-in teaching, which I am really grateful to have done because I think it's quite difficult, especially in a curatorial role, to not have that sort of experience of speaking to people, of varying your level of presentation. So I was glad for that. But it meant that things took a bit longer. In a certain year of the PhD, I got a fellowship at the Meadows Museum in Dallas, Texas, which is one of the leading places for the study of Spanish art in the U.S., along with maybe the Hispanic Society of America in New York. And so I was there for a year as a fellow. I worked on an exhibition on sort of Sorolla and his process, a small show, but one that sort of allowed you to get into the idea of exhibition making. And I also got to participate in a show they did on Fortuny. They have an interesting collection of sort of Fortuny pictures, but also things related to the study of his collecting by an American patron, William Hood Stewart. There's an amazing sort of album of things. So I wrote an essay for that catalog, and all these things sort of, I think, brought together for me the idea that working in a museum allowed you to do all kinds of things. You could deal with objects, you dealt with people, you dealt with really quite rigorous scholarly research, and you got to do it all at once. So I think after that experience, I really felt that museums were the place that I was best suited for. And then, after the pandemic, I applied for the fellowship in Spanish painting at the gallery, and then eventually that position was sort of dissolved, and the funder decided that he would prefer to fund sort of a permanent curatorial position, the associate curator position. There's never been a curator of Spanish art specifically at the gallery before. There's usually been sort of fit into Spanish and Italian and French, usually all put all together. So it's a great opportunity, and the gallery and I are very grateful to the Centro de Estudios Europa Hispánica for funding the position, which allows us to really focus on Spanish art in a very detailed kind of way.
Nice. And what's a typical day of the curator?
Well, I mean, there's all kinds of things, of course, but I think the main constant is email. It's a boring reality for all of us, but in the end, that's so much of your job is correspondence, setting things up, arranging, whether it's sort of events, all these things. But that's the same as everyone's job. That's fair. But on a good day. Maybe you'll get to go and see something in conservation. So as part of our preparations for an exhibition that will open next spring, we have 2 paintings upstairs that our 2 conservation fellows, Jack Chauncey and Valeria Kravchenko, are working on. And so sometimes you get to go up and see what they're working on. Especially with an exhibition open, you're usually giving a number of tours or visits to people. So that's sort of an ongoing thing, especially with Velasco open currently. And then, occasionally you get the time to go to the library and do a bit of work, whether it's on a catalog essay or on other kinds of research. So it's extraordinarily varied. I think that's one of the things that keeps it interesting, even when still long hours can be quite painful. But I think the fact that it's different all the time is something that makes it worth the pain.
And which personal qualities, in your opinion, needs to become a curator?
Well, I don't know. I can only say what's worked for me, because I think many of my colleagues, different institutions, as well as the National Gallery, are everyone has their own sort of different style, their different approach to it. No, but I think for me anyway, there sort of has to be a really dogged ability to self-motivate. It's at least in the sort of strictures of an institution. You're given deadlines, you work with other people, so you have to provide things. But still, a lot of it comes from, you really have to do things that might be not that interesting or the exact thing you want to do all the time. And, it's your job to do those things. And I think doing a PhD is a great education in what that's like. And then I think there really just has to be sort of an open and kind of gracious quality that allows you to deal with all kinds of things. Whether that's sort of patrons or other institutions, potential lenders. I think there is a good deal of the job that rests on interpersonal skills and being able to make people feel comfortable and to meet them at whatever level they would like to be met at. And so I think that's another thing that is maybe different in some ways than academia can be, and one of the things that makes having those skills really rewarding as a curator.
So basically, being a curator is quite sort of a job that you do on your own quite often, right?
Well, no, not quite. I mean, certainly at the gallery we work with great teams from all across different kinds of departments. But I mean, I think in terms of sort of conceptualizing and developing exhibition ideas, or doing the kind of writing and research that leads to catalog essays or other sort of collection catalog work, those things are often quite still individual, not necessarily, but often. But no, I mean, I think that's what I should underscore is that, there are these moments of sort of, you work on some things in a very solitary way. And then in others where you're working with other curators, like, for example, this exhibition that I'm working on for next spring is with Francesca Whitlam-Cooper, who's currently on mat leave, and then Imogen Tedbury. And we're working with curators at other institutions to bring together a big list of loans and other things. And so working with people, I think, is a key part of it as well. There are these moments where you have to sort of do your individual sort of contemplative monk-like work.
So in creating an exhibition, how much of the preparatory process is sort of like roughly percentage-wise self-motivated, and how much of it is like a teamwork?
Well, I mean, look, in the end, it all comes down to teamwork in the end. But I think still, when you're in that sort of proposal process, thinking it through, and there isn't a strict deadline, then it's a great deal of the work is quite self-motivated. As soon as something gets in the calendar, though, and you begin to sort of have the machine of the gallery turn around the exhibition with our wonderful exhibition managers and everybody else, then it becomes much more of a sort of a group activity and a group effort.
I see. And how does working in such an amazing institution as the National Gallery feels comparing it to the museums you previously were at?
Well, I mean, it's great, of course. I mean, the gallery has the resources and the personnel to be able to do kinds of things that other museums can't necessarily do. But on the other hand, the gallery is not a huge institution. I think you compare it to a place like the Louvre or the Met, and we only have a relatively small collection of about 2,500 objects. We only have one kind of object, and we really deal with a very sort of small segment of artistic production. And despite, I guess, the gallery feeling like such a huge institution, it isn't as big as some of these sort of really big universal museums. Nonetheless, sort of in its field, sort of Western European painting, the gallery is a real leader. And so the kinds of things we're able to do, whether it's with sort of technical research, conservation treatments, scientific analysis, as well as, I think, the willingness of other institutions to collaborate with us, makes the gallery a really exciting place to be able to work as a historian of paintings.
A friend of mine once, a friend of mine who works in the V&A once also told me that being a curator is actually a very hands-on job, where you end up also moving a lot of artworks and so on. Would you agree with her, or?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on the institution in a way. I mean, the gallery, we have a dedicated team of very, very professional, very expert art handlers who deal with all of the kind of actual movement of works. So we don't really, unfortunately, I guess, or maybe fortunately for the care of the objects, the curators don't really handle the objects that often. So no, I don't think there's actually that much sort of hands-on, actually physically sort of moving things. However, I think even given the size of the institution of the National Gallery, there is, in the end, you sort of realize a lot of the spade work, which maybe you assume is handed off to sort of an assistant or departmental associate or something like that. And it really is often, in many cases, the curator sort of, putting together, the seating chart for dinner, as is sometimes the case. Of course, we're helped by our events team doing that, but you are often asked to come in and make calls on things. So there is a lot of that, and then also for sort of corresponding and following up with people, sort of the thank you notes and all these other things. It might be that maybe the director is able to have things sort of assisted with, but for the curators, I mean, that's really often just us doing these things, and so I think it maybe is somewhat surprising to people who outside the museum that curators are really doing a lot of these small things. Of course, we have a huge amount of help on certain parts of our work from our exhibition managers and other people, but there's these smaller things that maybe I think people might assume we sort of have a secretary for the department or something like that, which we don't. So you often end up doing more sort of going down to the mailroom than you might have thought.
But no sort of art handling or hanging the lights. So we would not see you in a National Gallery with like a measure.
Well, I mean, going around with a measuring tape, that we do that sometimes actually, because that'll be thinking about sort of spacing and that kind of thing from the doors or from the corners. And it's often nice to be able to measure it yourself rather than have to ask an art handler to do it, which doesn't feel very fair. So yes, there's a bit of that, but unfortunately, no, I won't be up on the genie setting the lights. Much I would like to, but they don't let me do everything.
Do you have any favorite Spanish painting in the National Gallery?
Well, I mean, I think one of the ones that I really appreciate, similarly, I guess, for its sort of domestic scale and the kind of thing that you would want in your house, which is maybe not the best way to judge pictures, but especially when I'm asked this kind of question, that's what my mind goes to. It's really the little Zobran, the cup of water in a rose, really beautiful still life, about 1630, which came to the gallery in the late 1990s. A really, really remarkable work, little sort of silver plate, ceramic cup on it with a rose. I think for me, that's one of those pictures that just really is very absorbing. It's a painting that gives a lot, despite being so little in a way. So that I think is one of my favorite works in the collection.
I also wanted to ask you, what do you think is there that needs to be explored in the Spanish paintings, and especially in Spanish paintings of the later 19th century?
In terms of what are some research avenues, that kind of thing? Or?
Research artists that you think could be represented more in museums?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that it's a difficult question, and one that, I mean, people have been sort of dancing around for a long, long time. I mean, is the area around around Velázquez. Velázquez, of course, is a painter who had many administrative duties in the court, and so we know that he must have had some kind of workshop or studio, but we don't really know that much about it. His son-in-law, Juan Bautista Martínez del Mazo, is a very interesting painter who's able to, I think, take on some of Velázquez's style, and there are many works by him that are worth, I think, looking at more closely. So for me, that's it's a big possible topic, but I think thinking about sort of the workshop around Velázquez is a project that's worthwhile. My colleague at the Meadows Museum, recently appointed curator Patricia Manzano Rodriguez, wrote her PhD about Mazo, and she, I think, has been able to sort of pull out some new things about the artist. So that would be one sort of possibility. Yeah, I think in terms of sort of 19th century painting, it's more that it's not as well known abroad, Spanish art, and I think that an exhibition on that topic might be of potential interest. Although, as always, it can be difficult, I think, to interest people in things they don't already know about, which is a problem, but it's one that we constantly face, of course, working on old master paintings. So that might be another possibility.
And is there any painter, any Spanish painter, that you would like to do an exhibition on?
Well, I mean, as I said, I think one of the interesting prospects, again, not something that I've thought through in any great detail, would be an exhibition on Mazo, that deals with sort of his relationship to Velázquez, the kinds of works he makes, some that are very capable imitations of Velázquez, others that, in the case of the artist and his family, the picture in Vienna, really sort of it's his take on Las Meninas. There's an interesting sort of dialogue that I think could be investigated in an exhibition.
So maybe in a few years that will be the next exhibition of the National Gallery.
Well, I mean, in quite a few years, if ever. But we will see.
Potentially. And can you tell us a bit more about, we already touched obviously quite a lot on the topic of the preparation of the exhibition, but still a bit more like, why is it taking quite a few years? How is it all gluing together from the moment that you have an idea or your colleague has an idea? Like, what would it take from that moment until the moment that there are people coming inside the National Gallery?
Well, I mean, I guess so maybe we can divide it up in a way. Like, sort of, there's the stage of having an idea for a show, and of course, anybody can have a good idea, and then it's about sort of realizing which works are actually going to be available for loan, which ones are achievable as loans, and then you quickly begin to winnow down a checklist into something that might actually make feasible sense. And then once you have sort of this idea of the exhibition sort of sorted out a bit, it's proposed to a broader sort of exhibition committee, or depending on the institution, to your fellow colleagues. Then once it gets into the calendar, then sort of the long process begins in a way. So you'll often, as in for the case of a major exhibition, you'll send out sort of an announcement letter to many of the institutions that you're thinking about taking works from or asking for loans from. That'll usually go out, maybe 3 or 4 years in advance, because especially for works that are very well known, there will be other potential requests for these works from other institutions. And so it's often good to get out early, and so have institutions aware of what you're doing rather than to come in too late. Then the process of sort of doing a lot of visits, if possible, not always possible, but sometimes it can be good to go and actually speak with the curators of the pictures at the institutions they're at. So it shows that you're serious about it. It also allows you to explain the project, your thinking, what you'll be able to say that's new about this particular work of art. Then loan letters begin to go out, and loan requests are usually sent, depending on the exhibition, but ideally sort of 2 to 3 years in advance of the exhibition, mostly because it's a very long process of getting them actually returned from the lending institutions, because those are usually reviewed at sort of board meetings or other executive meetings that only happen a couple times a year. And so if you submit a loan request letter, it can often take maybe 6 months to hear back about that loan. So that's why, in a way, that's one of the reasons that you begin so early in that process. And then sort of concurrently to this, you have the catalog writing, catalog research that is all sort of going on. Then once you get to about a year out from the show, then you begin to have sort of more meetings around design of the exhibition, hopefully by this point, finalizing the loans that are going to come, and then meetings with design about what the exhibition is going to look like and all these things, working on the program, lists for the opening receptions, that kind of thing. That all sort of happens in that last sort of 6 months before. So, but that's why, I think it's maybe, a bit alien to people, but it does really take that long, mostly because you have to build in a lot of time for other institutions to respond and to decide if they're willing to lend or only to certain venues. So that's, I think, the process that takes the longest in a way. But concurrently with that, you have all the work, the research, the catalog, all of these things that are going to make the exhibition into the intellectual project that you envisioned 5 years ago.
And the process of negotiating with other museums for a loan, is it is it difficult, and what's more difficult, to negotiate with the individuals who have the artwork or to negotiate with other museums?
Well, I think, no matter who the lender is, we're, of course, very excited to collaborate with them and are relying, of course, on their generosity and goodwill. And there's still sort of, I think, the reality that often when dealing with institutions, they have competing demands, they have other things that they're trying to do. And so it can, in my experience anyway, dealing with institutions is an opportunity for great sort of collaboration, but also because there are so many processes that the decision has to be made through at another museum, that often it's just a longer process. Whereas sometimes with private collectors, they can be a bit more nimble in their replies, and they can come back to you quite quickly saying that yes, because they don't have to check with a director, a board of trustees. They can just say yes or no. So often a bit faster with a private loan, but in both cases, I mean, at the gallery and other museums, it is central to our work that we're able to borrow works for exhibition, and so we're always grateful to be able to collaborate with whoever we work with.
Was there a moment in your career when you were preparing an exhibition and you were highly reliant, or like in the career of your colleagues and friends that you're aware of, that you were highly relying on one particular artwork, and then in the last moment, an institution or a private collector decided not to loan it to you for various reasons? And what have you done in this moment? How did it feel?
I guess I haven't had to really face this personally, but I mean, it does happen. It does happen all the time, especially when you're building a show, usually on quite a major artist that relies on a very major work by that artist. And I mean, that's one of those things where you really have to be able to go to that institution as early as possible and really lay out why, your exhibition will add something to their understanding of the artwork, is a worthy representation of the artist. And so, I think it can be quite difficult, obviously, if in the end someone says no, but well within their rights to say no, of course. But then I think there's sort of that process of how is there a way you can do the exhibition without this work? Is it truly sort of indispensable for the narrative that you would like to tell? And that sometimes it's the case, and sometimes not, I suppose. So that's sort of then a question of how can you still tell the story that you set out to, even if you don't have sort of the perfect example of it.
And what's the favorite process in preparing the exhibition? What's your favorite moment?
I don't know. I mean, it all sort of runs together in a way. Well, I think maybe once I've finished writing my catalog essay, that's usually when I feel I know the most, and I've submitted things that I was usually late on, and so then it means that we're getting closer to the part where now it's just more sort of administrative things pulling together. The intellectual labor is at least partly done for the time being. So I think for me it's like when I've submitted my bit for the catalog and done some catalog editing, I'm like, okay, we're on the road to getting this done, and now I feel like I'm really in command of the literature. I'm in command of the subject, and the moment before that is always a little more touch and go.
So you like to be aware of what your next step is already in being command, I see.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's once you get to that stage, you feel like you're getting near the end, which is good.
I see. And I wanted to ask you, I know that in a different countries and cultures, it's quite different. Where I come from, it's very sort of the relationship between the curator and the trade is really close and really indispensable. And I know that it really varies on each country, on each culture, and also the demands of the collectors, whether they would need a certain research on each painting that they acquire from the curator. I know that in various fields of old master paintings, it's also a bit different. But how is it for you, your relationship with the trade?
Well, I mean, it's always a joy to work with people, whether at auction houses or at dealers, because in many ways they see a lot more paintings than we do, and they're able to form opinions about them more quickly in some cases than we are as curators, where we're often we're dealing with our collections, we're dealing with things from other institutions. Of course, we're considering acquisitions and seeing other works elsewhere, but there's nothing I don't think quite like having spent time in an auction house and seeing a lot of, in some cases, bad stuff. Because I think that's what you can forget, is that working in museums, you're often dealing with relatively good examples of a particular artist's work or a particular genre of thing, and it's worthwhile always to go and see things that are bad. Because, and especially sort of in the context of a day sale or something like that, you see things that are interesting, not especially good, but they're interesting. And I think that's a real advantage. And so we always enjoy conversations with people at auction houses and elsewhere, exactly for that kind of expertise that they have. And I think certainly in my PhD during that stage, especially in the US, it seemed to me that there was more of a sort of divide between museums and the trade. But I feel like that sort of hesitancy has to do more with sort of with sort of the PhD and graduate school. And now since I've been working here, I think there is that certainly sort of mutual respect for what both people and what both kinds of workers are doing and bringing to the art world.
And how often does it happen that, for example, the auction house or a Spanish paintings dealer like Jorge, for example, or Jorge of Kalnagi, or the other dealer who is dealing with Spanish paintings coming to you for any type of attribution or any type of research?
So I would say that still relatively rare in many cases, because we're not really, as National Gallery curators, we're not supposed to opine on these things. And so because of that, I think they sort of keep their distance in things that would relate to sort of commercial value and attribution.
I mean, National Gallery is brilliant at that, but still, what do you think, and why do you think National Gallery achieved more audience? What do you think museums are doing and museums need to do to sort of attract more audience, to attract more younger audience to the exhibition?
Well, it's a perennial question. I guess I take the long view on this, in that I don't know that old master paintings have ever been sort of a young person's game. And they've been around a long time, and our audience is sort of what it is. Not to say that we can't try to develop other parts of sort of the UK population to try to engage them with the National Gallery. But I sort of see it as outside my remit as a curator. My job is to represent the collection as best I can, to do shows that I think are interesting, that really bring something out of the art. And maybe the fact that I'm not 70 will sort of change my view on things. I think it does. But in terms of sort of drawing in more people, I mean, I think that's really down to, it's down to our marketing teams. It's down to, we have many people at the gallery who are thinking about exactly this. And the exhibition program is part of that. But it's also about making the place, an exciting and enjoyable place to be. And so I think, for example, like the new supporters house development at the gallery, sort of a new space for our members, is one sort of nice way to bring people in. And then, a huge component of this, of course, has to do with school groups and our learning team. And they do an amazing job in bringing, a huge number of students to the gallery almost every single day. So I think that's one of the ways that people can, from a young age, get involved in museums, I think, is through these sort of school trips. I think, though, that then you have to really hope that they actually come back after those school trips. I feel like many friends of mine here, they talk about having gone to the National Gallery once when they were 6 or 7 and had never having been back since. And I think that the hope is that some of these kids who come through in these school groups will think about coming back more. And I am hopeful now, especially with the Sainsbury Wing having reopened, that we really will have a space and a place to be in the centre of London that is more enjoyable. I think certainly, even already our visitor numbers in sort of daily terms are much higher than they were just about a month ago. So very encouraging, I think.
I wanted to ask you, what would you suggest, advice for a person first time visiting the National Gallery? Which route to take, what not to miss?
I see. Well, I mean, I think for me, sort of one of the ideal routes often for me is to go from, the Arnolfini portrait of Van Eyck, then back through the Wilkins building, looking at some Rembrandt, stopping in the still life room, which I think is a wonderful new addition as part of our big bicentenary redisplay. Of course, then through the Spanish pictures. I think for a first-time visitor, I think the inevitable stop in all 3 or 4 of our 19th century galleries is key. That would be my sort of suggested route, and maybe also a stop at Holbein's Ambassadors, which is one of the most sort of marvelous paintings in the gallery. But no, I don't think I have any prescribed route. I think the main thing is that you shouldn't try and see it all at once. You should just pop in, have an hour tops, and just sort of wander around a couple of rooms slowly. That's the most fun, I think.
And I wanted to ask you, what do you think of this new Sainsbury Wing? How was the preparation? By the way, the Ambassadors is one of my favorite paintings. So if one day it just flies out, you know where to find it. But Sainsbury Wing, what's?
Yeah, no, I think the renovation of sort of the main entrance to the Sainsbury Wing, I think has really worked. I mean, it's done what it set out to do, in that it's a very functional space. I remember when we saw it before it had been opened to the public, we were like, this is large in a way. This is a big foyer. But now that we're having sort of 10 or 12,000 visitors a day, as we have had in the past couple of weeks, that space is all necessary, and I think it allows people to walk in and to feel like there's sort of a welcoming area for them to be in. It's easy to see where the shop is, where the coffee spot is, where you go up to the collection. And so I think in terms of clarity, the new welcome area works very well. And the area also in front of the western entrance, so what will be the research center entrance, once that next phase of renovation is completed, with the 2 sort of built-in benches, is actually quite a nice space as well. So I think it's really been a positive enhancement of what the gallery's welcome is like. What was the final part of your question?
How was the Rehang? How was the preparation for it?
Yes, no, I mean the Rehang, the process for the Rehang, of course, went on for quite a long time. There were meetings with sort of all the curators. There was a core team of some senior curators who looked very closely at sort of the plans, all guided in part by Per Rumberg, the head of the curatorial department. And that was a process of just trying to figure out how are we going to make impactful change to the presentation of the collection, and to really significantly rethink for the first time since the opening of the Sainsbury Wing some 35 years ago, how the collection should be presented. And in the main, we have really kept the arrangement in a way that we think will feel familiar to people. It's still largely chronological, but we've allowed for some sort of mixing of different places in a way that we haven't always before. And so, for example, in room 30 with the Spanish pictures, we have a painting by Cavallino, a recent acquisition, hanging there alongside Ribera. So this is a sort of small story about the viceroyalty of Naples, how Spain was really in control of much of southern Italy for really almost the entire time that we associate with Spain's sort of great age of painting. And that story hasn't always been told very clearly. And I think now, for example, that's one of the things that we've done to sort of try and show these much more broad connections rather than sort of keeping it sort of national school as we had in the past. So I think it's a really good development and exciting way to see the paintings. And certainly I think some of them have never really looked better in the time that I've been there than they look now.
Yeah, I had Absolutely the same feeling, and the way that you guys also showed the different story of the Renaissance is purely amazing. What do you think of the new acquisition?
The most recent one, well, I think it's a spectacular picture, spectacular thing. I mean, obviously known to us and to our predecessors for decades. So something that has long been on the radar. But a truly weird and wonderful Northern Renaissance picture.
But whom do you think who is the painter? And
Well, I mean, for that, I think I can only defer to the experts in the field. But it's a magnificent thing.
but also an attributed picture.
Mm-hmm.
How did it happen? Are we expecting a new discovery?
Well, I
soon?
think I mean certainly the expert on this will be the curator of the picture, Emma Capron, and I think she'll be able to say more than I could with much more reason and foundation than I'll be able to say.
And any favorite painting that's coming up in an auction now, or just came that you've seen and you thought that was a great painting?
No, actually, I've yet to really look at the upcoming sales, but I need to go and take a look at what's coming up. But in terms of Spanish things, I mean, I was interested to see this Tomás Yepes still life. I think a nice example of his work. But other than that, in terms of Spanish things, I haven't seen too much that's coming up in the next little while that's really sort of moved.
I wanted to ask you, what are the next exhibitions or exciting news about the National Gallery? What's to look out for?
Well, we have this amazing exhibition on Millet, on sort of his representations of working laborers, and that's curated by my colleague Sarah Herring. So that'll be coming up, I believe, in the summer or the fall. Then we have a show that's sort of a highlights show from the Kröller-Müller Museum. It's about sort of neo-impressionist painting, and that'll be in our Tegs galleries from the fall, so our major show of the Sainsbury Wing for the fall. And then we'll have an exhibition on a Spanish painter, which hasn't been publicly announced yet, so I can't really say much more on that. But that will open in May 2026. Again, sort of the major show in the Sainsbury Wing.
Sounds really exciting. Thank you everyone for watching us. It was the Phantom of the Rubens and Daniel Sobrino Ralston here today. Thank you for participating in it, and please stay with us and follow me for more art news.
Thank you very much. No, it's been a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for watching.